Imagine a place where the boundaries of age, industry, background, and culture melt away, replaced by a shared desire to explore the depths of our collective experiences here on the open, shaded porch. Amidst an atmosphere of serenity and tranquility, leaders from all walks of life gather to share their stories, the stories that shape their very beings and doings. This is the Knowledge Mindfulness Porch with Laila Maroof.
I'm back on the porch with Jessica Chen, continuing our discussion about her new book, Smart Not Loud. Jessica has been sharing insights from her journey of navigating the challenges of growing up in a traditional, quiet culture while thriving in a fast-paced, loud environments like broadcast journalism and corporate America. Jessica, I want to delve into the subtitle of your book, How to Get Noticed at Work for All the Right Reasons. What I appreciate about this subtitle is its emphasis on being noticed for the right reasons, especially in today's world, where it's easy to stand out for the wrong ones. With workplace conflicts on the rise, often due to differing perspectives, you emphasize the importance of active listening. However, impatience and lack of acceptance can escalate tensions. Since conflict is inevitable, how can we manage it effectively at work?
Yes. How frustrating is it to, be known for something you don't want to be known for? And I think for some of us, it's easy to fall into that trap in the sense where, let's say, because you are such a team player, because you want to be helpful, you become that yes person where you say yes to a lot of things to help people out. But as a result of that yes, which came from very good intention, suddenly you're now boxed into a lot of projects and roles that you don't really want to do or doesn't necessarily accelerate your career. And so the focus on that subtitle is, yes, how do you get noticed at work for the right reasons? And the right reasons, what it means for you is different from what it means from somebody else. But you yourself know what feels right. And so in order for me to really talk about that, we have to sort of take a step back, because in the book, I talk about these 4 reframes. And these reframes are incredibly important in setting the foundation to make sure you are noticed for the right reasons. And the first one, I'll go through the 4 really quickly so you can see that this is really the core of it. The first one is what I call engaging with people. So when it comes to how we communicate, which is really how we engage with people, a lot of times we see it as, should I say something or should I not say something? Should I speak or should I just listen? It's very black and white. But I think if you want to be noticed for the right reasons, it's not if you should or shouldn't. It's, I want you to think about when I do speak, how can I tailor it to the person I'm talking to so it resonates? So do you see the focus is different? It's not, should I say something or should I not say something? It's when I say something, how can I make sure it's relevant and it resonates? Hugely different approach. That can help you get noticed for the right reasons. The second reframe is what I call how you spend time at work. Now, for many of us, the way we spend time at work is we got to do this project. Our manager assigned us this project. We got to get it done and we'll work hard and we will get it done. But kind of similar to what I was just inferring to earlier, where sometimes when we say yes to too many things, we become boxed into certain roles, certain projects that, yes, we're happy to do, but it doesn't necessarily drive us or makes us excited, or it doesn't necessarily expand a skill that we want to learn. So when it comes to reframing how we spend time, it's not just doing the work that's assigned to us, it's how can we take work that we perhaps have to do, because sometimes we have no choice, we do got to do the work, but how can you maximize that opportunity? For example, let's say your manager assigned you to put together this big Excel sheet and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't really want to do it, but I know I have to do it. And you do a good job. Once you're done and you've delivered that project, how can you now take that completed project and ask for what you want? So you can say, hey, I know I just spent the last month and a half putting together this Excel spreadsheet. I know it has helped the team do A, B, and C. But now that this project is done, can we talk about how I've been interested in project X, Y, and Z? So it's maximizing the time you spend at work so you can leverage more opportunities for yourself. I think that is how you can get noticed for the right reasons. The third one is how you can basically celebrate your wins. How do you handle wins? And I think for some of us, talking about ourselves doesn't feel natural. It feels very awkward. We don't like to put ourselves in the spotlight. Plus, it's like, maybe we were taught like, you don't want to be that like boastful, showy person, right? But I do think there's an element of being able to celebrate the amazing work that you're doing. And I have this quote in the book that it actually comes from my mom. And she was like, you got to be your own best cheerleader. You got to be your own best cheerleader. And I love that quote because it's a good reminder that even though you're working hard, even though you're doing good work, at the end of the day, you have to be able to celebrate it in, of course, small ways, but sometimes big ways too. And in terms of from a work context, it can be something as subtle as forwarding an email to your manager where your client said the words, "Loved working with you." Maybe your manager wasn't on that email, but you can forward that email to your manager and add in a quick FYI just so they can see it. And then you can add in like the words, really happy to get this message, right? And I think little things like that are great ways to celebrate yourself, to handle the wins. And it also gets you noticed for the right reasons. And then finally, to wrap up the 4 reframes, it goes back to conflict. So how do you manage conflict? I think for a lot of us, it is so awkward to engage in tricky conversations. It's so awkward to deal with, contentious situations at work. Now, I know for me, and I don't know about you, but I remember whenever there would be tricky conversations or conflict, my default used to be to just kind of like hide or try to solve it myself, right? I didn't like those conversations. But I realized, and this actually comes from the journalism days that I worked in, people tend to appreciate you when you are able to loop them into the process, especially when things are going wrong. And what I have found is when you tell people what's going on, what happened, when did things go wrong, but not just telling them the problems, offering potential solutions to solve that conflict, people tend to trust you more. They tend to actually say, yeah, I know maybe Jessica might have messed up here, but I see how she's trying to fix it. And it's in the how and how you proactively communicate, not reactively communicate, that can also help you build that reputation, build credibility, and also get you noticed for the right reasons.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think for me personally, I always thought of the pause moment. Whenever I'm in a situation where, you're dealing with a bit of tension and all that, that pause moment where it gives you time to kind of bring in more information to process what's happening around you. So you're not focusing on what they're saying as much as, okay, why are they saying maybe this is happening in their life? Laila, don't take it personally. Talking with myself in those few seconds, it just makes me less angry, less, my emotion. Let's say I have more control on my emotions where I can respond and not react as much. So a lot of those techniques, of course, we learn them as we go in life. It's trial and error sometimes. That's why I think a book like yours and your teachings are amazing because, you're saving time for people to many years of trial and error and how they can use that and, see if it works in their context. Because again, I think your tips are amazing. But always I wonder about the context. I always think of the context. Things that can work in your context could be tricky in my context or in certain times. So what's your advice about all these tips that you're giving, but being aware of the context also is a crucial point for these tips to work, right?
Absolutely. And I think that is where, emotional intelligence certainly comes into play. Emotional intelligence, we know, is that self-awareness, but it's also that social awareness, right? It's understanding the dynamics and people around you. And this book, it's really for, people to really think about how they can, better show up and do it in a way that feels right. But I also acknowledge how sometimes there are certain work cultures, there are certain environments where no matter what you do, you're still not getting that recognition. And sometimes it is blatantly obvious that there is favoritism going on. It's blatantly obvious where it's an environment that is completely unhealthy. And no matter how amazing of a person you are or how hard you work, it won't work, right? And that's when you have to realize, am I in the right place? Am I in the right environment? And I know it can be scary, but sometimes stepping away and stepping to a new environment can be that change. And it will take time. You got to go out, you got to start, looking for jobs, talking to people. But at the end of the day, no matter what, finding a supportive environment and finding good people around you is how you can accelerate your career growth. And I feel if you loop it in with a lot of the strategies I share in the book and you're in a great environment, oh my gosh, you're unstoppable. You're
definitely.
unstoppable.
Definitely. And I think I relate to also what you said. We need that emotional intelligence, social intelligence, but I would add also is the human spiritual intelligence, which is that kindness, compassion, empathy, human to human, without those dividers that we kind of put out there. So yes, definitely that's the case. Actually, talking about change, a couple of years back, I left academia and I decided, I needed a new challenge in my life. Like, when you reach a place where you feel you have given your best, you've taken the best, and now it's time for that change in your life. And I read something about your career brand and how can that help me in my adventure going forward.
I love that you brought this up. This is one of my favorite chapters in the book. And it's actually right in the middle of the book, which is part 2. And it's all about what I call building your quiet capital framework. And your quiet capital framework essentially are 3 things. It's thinking about your career brand, it's thinking about building credibility, and it's advocating for yourself. So career brand, some people say it's like, oh, you mean like personal brand, like building my personal brand? Personally, I like the term career brand because it's how we think about, when we go into work every day, our career, where we want to take our career. And I know for me, I was always like, personal brand sounds very like influencer type, and I don't really that's not necessarily kind of like where I'm going. So career brand is kind of like more of like it just sticks in my opinion. So when it comes to career brand, I want to say it is probably one of the most powerful things we can do in terms of building your career brand. And I have it broken down into a few steps where in the book, I actually walk people through how you can build your career brand. But from a high level, without going into too much detail, I will say, your career brand is something you can control. Your career brand is what people think of you when you're not in the room. Your career brand is when people are making decisions and there's a project on the table. Who should we put on this project? And because you have made your career brand so known and so visible, there's no question that you are the person that they want. But I think for a lot of us, going back to that spending time, that was one of the reframes that we talked about earlier. I think sometimes it's easy for us to just do work that we just do, that we're assigned, right? But it's thinking about how we can maximize the work that we're doing so that we can be noticed the way we want to be. And so the way I break down career brand is really kind of like a few steps. It's really thinking about, okay, what's my differentiating factor? That's number 1. And differentiating factor are things like what comes easy to you naturally and you enjoy. That is very, very important because nobody can take that away from you. And some people call it like being in your flow state. Some people say like, it's just like, it's just natural to them, right? I say it's like, when you wake up in the morning every day, what's the one work or what's the one project? What's that one thing that you gravitate towards doing? It comes easy to you and you enjoy doing it. You have to identify your differentiating factor. And then the second thing is, it's not just identifying it. It's now that you know that this is what you're good at, how can you maximize and expand your reach so that other people know about it? And what I mean by this is, for example, and here's kind of like an anecdote. So let's say that you know that you are doing this kind of work comes really easy to you, but you're like, gosh, I would be really interested in learning a little bit more about something else in a different department. How can you actually take your differentiating factor and almost offer it as a service to another department? Because that can be the bridge and that can be the connection where you can start developing relationships with new people who you might not have had before. And let me share a quick story to kind of like, bring this all to light. So there's a story, especially in this chapter, where I interviewed somebody and he was telling me that when he was hired early on, he was sitting in the risk department of his company. So he was managing the risk for this, Fortune 500 company, but he always had this interest and this inkling to learn a little bit more about business. He wanted to be more in the business side of the company. But it's like, how do you bridge that gap, right? Because his career brand was all just about, oh, he's the risk guy, right? And so he knew that his differentiating factor was being able to take a lot of data, synthesizing it, and making it easily understandable. And so he was like, well, how can I offer this as a service to maybe another department to build that bridge? So his first, group or department that he approached was actually the sales department, which was, again, one of the business functions at the company. And so he goes to like people in the sales department and he was like, hey, my manager and I in the risk department, we're putting together this, huge database of, numbers, blah, blah, blah. If you want, I can take your numbers and put it into this data and run the numbers for you. And the folks in the sales department were like, for free? Sure. Like, yeah, we would love this data. Now, I will say, because he was offering to do this, of course, he became way more busy. Of course, he had to work way more than 40 hours a week to get this done. But to him, it was worth it because he wanted to expand how he was seen. He wanted to expand how he was perceived and his career brand. So he was working, of course, a lot of hours. But at the end of the day, because he was able to do this for a department he wanted to learn more about to up-level his skill, suddenly he wasn't just known as the risk guy. He was known as a guy who, of course, he could get his risk work done, but he was also learning a lot about sales. So that eventually, when a sales role came up, he wasn't just, who's this person? People actually knew him. And so that is how he made that transition into another department seamlessly because he thought about his career brand.
I think also what you're saying about playing this in a smart way is, yes, he's building those connections, those strategic kind of relationships that he will need in this work environment. But again, how do you put the boundaries, right? So how do you work between having the boundaries and building bridges? How do you balance between the two?
So the tip that I will share here comes from the chapter where I talk about advocating for yourself. Now, when we think about advocating for yourself, we often think about asking for what you want. And that is absolutely a huge part of it. You advocating for yourself requires you to ask for what you want and not just ask once. It's knowing how to circle back and follow up because we can't expect asking once is enough. But I do think part of advocating for yourself is also knowing how to tactfully, that's a key word, tactfully say no to. Because again, if we say yes to too many things, our time, we only have X amount of hours every single day. If we say yes to too many things, we're taking time away from doing things that we actually want to do, things that actually energize us, things that can help us up-level a certain skill. But I know saying no is hard. Sometimes we don't have the option to say no. Sometimes we just got to do it, a fire that we have to put out at work, right? So there's two ways I see it. The first way is sometimes certain situations your manager is like, hey, we got to do this thing. And you're like, oh gosh, like I know this is going to take X amount of hours, but I know I have to do it to be that team player. So in a situation like that, do it. Do that project, do it well, and do it the best you can. But then after you're done supporting and helping and really, let's say, stepping up for somebody else, then once you're done with that project and let's say your manager is not as stressed about it, find time with them to talk about what it is you are interested in. You can say, hey, I know we just finished, project X and, I'm glad it all came out okay at the end, right? I know it was like, quote unquote, let's say a stressful time, but I want to talk to you about how, moving forward, it's these other kinds of projects that I am more interested in. And I think timing is also very important too. It's catching them at the right time, catching them when they're not stressed themselves so that they are open-minded to hearing what you have to say. So that's one scenario where you just do it, but then find time to really have an honest conversation with them after. The other situation is where you're like, gosh, people keep throwing me these projects and it's stressing me out, or it's too much, or it's just not kind of work that I think is going to be helping me. And if you see that there is a way for you to say no, I actually want you to structure it like this. So I call it the TEF approach. So the T is first thinking about, of course, your tone. It's a lot of it is like how you are saying no in your tone. Being neutral, being matter of fact is incredibly important. The E is, okay, when you do say no, how can you explain, and that's the E, giving one or two high-level reasons why you're not the right person for this. It could be maybe it's just time. The time is not good right now. You have too much work. Give a reason or two and just let them know. It's not that you're not wanting to help. It's just that it's just not, you might not be the best person or the timing is not right. The F is also very important. It's follow up. Follow up with options. If somebody's asking you for help, chances are it's because they really do need the help. But to be perceived as a team player, you don't want them to feel like you're just leaving them hanging, that you're not wanting to be a team player. Following up can be like, I'm not the best person for this, or I don't have the time right now, but maybe talk to this person or maybe check out this resource. So you're kind of giving them, other options to consider. And I feel like this TEF approach, TEF, tone, explain, follow up, is a very strategic way of saying no that gives the impression that you're still a team player. You're just not the right person for it right now.
Again, what you're saying is you don't communicate it as no, so it comes out so negative. So what you're doing is you're really kind of repackaging it in a really kind of sequential, nice way that doesn't feel even that it's negative in any way by saying no, which is, I think that's the smart part of this, which really, really makes sense. I want to go back to your background as a journalist. What did you take from that? I read, I think, in your book, and it really kind of resonated so much in my head when you talked about positive skepticism. And why? Because I feel that's a very important method or skill that we need more and more of that to tweak, to sharpen in today's world because of the misinformation, the disinformation, what's going on with the AI, with the deep, all the stuff that we're surrounded with. I thought that was such an incredible skill that you talked about and comes from journalism. You want to elaborate a little bit about it?
I'm so glad you brought this up. And this is actually towards the beginning of the book, because this positive skepticism is a mindset and it's an approach. And the backstory of this is, so as journalists, as you all can imagine, we're interviewing people every single day, right? It's the news story, what's going on in the news that day. And a lot of times when we interview people, we're listening to what they're saying. We're holding them accountable, perhaps politicians, businessmen, right? And a lot of times they'll say what they have to say. They have their talking points. They have their communications advisors telling them how to formulate their message, right? And as journalists, our job is to make sure that we are, A, holding them accountable, we're listening, but we're also not necessarily buying and believing 100% what they're saying. And that allows us to exercise truly critical thinking skills, right? And the journalist approach is something that we can also not just apply in the journalism world, but we can also apply ourselves. And what do I mean by that? So oftentimes when we are trying something new, when we are putting ourselves out there, it can feel very scary. And it's easy for us to default to, no, I don't want to do it. Or no, I'm not good enough. Or, oh my gosh, that person must know more than me, so I'm just not going to say anything. Or that idea was really silly. It's this narrative in our head that causes us sometimes to diminish our own genius. It causes us to diminish our own expertise because we might default to assuming other people know more or other people are right. So that at the end of it, we might not say anything at all, right? So the journalist approach is seeing and recognizing that we might have this narrative in our head. I can't do it. I'm not smart enough. People know more. And the resulting behavior is us not saying anything. But the journalist approach is getting us to think differently. But how do you know you don't know more? How do you know that you can't offer value? How do you know that this won't be something that could be a smart thing to say? So the journalist approach is that positive skepticism where you're thinking, wait a second, I know I'm being extra harsh on myself, but I'm trying to challenge that voice in my head to not make it so that I feel stuck, but instead I'm challenging myself to go, well, how do I really know that that's true? Because as journalists, we're asking ourselves that when we're interviewing people all the time. So it's thinking about yourself and the things you tell yourself. How do I really know it's not true? Or, how do I know that it is true, right? And it's because a lot of answers and a lot of life is, frankly, it's gray, right? There is no black and white a lot of times in life, right? And sometimes what's valuable or what's not valuable to you, it doesn't mean it's not valuable or valuable to somebody else. And that's why I want people to feel that if you have something that you want to say and you truly believe it's like the right thing or that it can offer value, own it and say it. Because don't just close yourself up and say, well, it's not valuable. It might not be it might be common knowledge to you, but it might be so insightful to somebody else.
Okay. I think how I took it when I read it was the other way around. It's when you hear something and how you don't take it for granted that it's true and, be a bit skeptic, question what you're hearing and, ask yourself, is this true? Is it credible? Can I use this? Can I process this and apply it in my context and so on? That's why maybe I mentioned the misinformation and disinformation, because with all, you heard about the fake news and this and that, and, with the social media, you can hear and read so much of what's, going out, out there. But then again, how do you really make sure what you're hearing is credible, what you're using is credible? So I thought that, from a journalist side is just making sure always that the information is right, it's credible, and we can use it in our own world. But that brings me to the AI world. I think in the many years between you being a journalist and now you're the CEO of your company and all that, how did the landscape of work change? And how does that, you think, going to affect the communication arena in the next few years to come? I'm not going to say many years, I'm going to say few years, because we're seeing the pace of change is really going very fast. So how do you see what's coming for communication, especially with the AI now? We see how a lot of, I don't know, I'm sure you heard about the actresses, they take their voices, they use them in here and there and all that. So where do you see we're heading when it comes to human communication?
There's two things that come to mind. And the first one is the ability and really practicing and critical thinking skills. And actually, it goes back to that journalist approach we just talked about, because even though I was coming from the perspective of that narrative in our head and making sure that we are developing our own self-confidence is just as relevant in this world now, where you're thinking, well, whatever I am reading, wherever that source came from, is it really true, right? And I think with AI, because it allows information, good and bad information, honestly, to just come out at such a rapid pace, the quality control, oh my gosh, like you really truly have to question what it is sometimes you're reading. And not only just reading, are you allowing it to really embed in what you believe too? And so going back to kind of what you're saying, the journalist approach, that at the end of the day is a mindset. It's a mindset for yourself. It's a mindset for how you view the world, what you read and what you see, right? So that's where that, kind of similar, like it could be that positive skepticism. It's like, okay, you're reading it, you're seeing what maybe the author, the writer is saying, or wherever it is you're reading your content, right? But it's like, is there another point of view, right? I think that's very important in this information where there is just so much information. And a lot of this information, you're like, where the heck did that come from, right? The other thing with AI and kind of like this direction where we're going is, and this is all coming from a communications perspective, is how important now it is for human connection. With communications in the technology sense, in the robotic sense, we can talk to Chat GPT, we can get information from there. A lot of times, sometimes what's communicating to us through for example, even customer service stuff, right? A lot of it is very automated. It's gonna be even more AI driven, right? But I do think now, because that's the world, for better or worse, that's where we're entering. I think there is a lot of really great benefits to this, but this is where I think we have to double down on the genuine, authentic human connections so that we can stay closer together. So that's kind of how I think about it in these two lenses. It's seeing all this rapid fire information that's coming out, allowing us to really critically think about it, understand where the sources are from. Is this really true? Where else can I go to try to balance out the things I'm reading so I'm getting both perspective? But the other thing is, because there's so much information coming out and because a lot of it is so automatic, sometimes we can lose that human touch, right? So I think if businesses want to stand out, if you want to stand out, it's really not thinking that your communications is not going to be important. In fact, it's going to be even more important to better connect with people because that's how you differentiate yourself.
Right. I think a lot of what you said from the beginning kind of boils down to this point, is building that human connection, building that trust, building all through your communication skills as you're going around and, all through these years. So lastly, what's next for Jessica?
Oh my goodness, what is next? Well, I love the work that I do, which is helping people find and build that confidence to communicate, to show up in a way that feels right. And so this book came out not too long ago, Smart Not Loud, and it's just so amazing to see the impact, the positive reception that we've been getting from this book. And, frankly, I've loved seeing how companies are actually also implementing this into their professional development training. That's been really exciting to see. But I guess in terms of next steps, and I guess this is not too surprising, but I think a lot of the things that I'm talking about in this book, which is Smart Not Loud and communications, I think there's definitely an audience for that in the young adults. People who are preteen, teen, who are now just starting to kind of find their own voice, right? And so we might be doing, kind of a younger version of the principles in this book to help people develop that confidence. And so that might be kind of project number 2 in the next short term.
Oh, that's wonderful. Really wonderful. It always warms my heart when I feel that the effort and energy is going to the younger generation. Because again, these are the future. And, putting your energy in the future leaders, that's amazing work. Jessica, thank you so much. It was wonderful, really. I've learned so much today, really. Thank you for being here with us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was such a pleasure talking to you, and I hope folks will really enjoy this book, Smart Not Loud.
I'm sure they will. And that concludes this week's Knowledge Mindfulness Porch. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to subscribe so you won't miss any new episode. If you have a moment, we would greatly appreciate it if you could leave us a review. helping other amazing individuals like yourself discover us. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.
You have been listening to the Knowledge Mindfulness Porch with Laila Maroof. If you want to join the movement of knowledge mindfulness and shape the world of tomorrow, go to drlailamaroof.com. The Knowledge Mindfulness Porch is a production of Forbes Books.